This video is supported by patrons like you. If you'd like to become a patron, please head over to patreon.com/Matt Jarbo. A few days ago, the Star Wars fandom was relatively turned on its ear when it was announced that David Benioff and DB Weiss were no longer working on the Star Wars trilogy that they had been contracted to do starting in 2022, 2024, and finishing in 2026. It was a big blow to Star Wars fans who were excited to see what these guys are going to come up with. In fact, I talked about it in this video here. Star Wars trilogy canceled. The predominant reason why I'm bringing this up is because, for one, I really do like that thumbnail, and I just wanted to share it with you guys. But yesterday, we got a little bit of a look at the inner workings of Lucasfilm from a report in Variety that seemed to dive into the overall culture of or environment under Kathleen Kennedy, and it wasn't good. It showcased that she was not really trusted, that she kind of listened to the story group in order to kind of figure out how to run things. And it really does showcase that there's not a lot of control that's happening at Lucasfilm, and it doesn't feel like the right people are steering the ship. And that might be one of the reasons why Benioff and Weiss left. Well, today, the Hollywood Reporter put out this article. Divided attention and toxic fandom, why the Game of Thrones duo bailed on Star Wars. And that's a big subject right there as well, because this is something that wasn't really addressed in the original Variety reporting. In fact, they didn't talk about that aspect of it when discussing this particular story, because it was more about attacking Kathleen Kennedy than it was putting the assault on Dan and Dave. But it feels like this particular article has a lot more to do with attacking Dan and Dave. So this feels like PR coming out of Lucasfilm as a way to spin the narrative the other direction, which is kind of funny. So according to this, it says Lucasfilm's Kathleen Kennedy is on the hunt for new filmmakers as David Benioff and Dan Weiss leave a galaxy far, far away over their commitment to a lucrative $250 million Netflix deal. Saying here that sometime in the past summer, David Benioff and Dan Weiss took their families to Italy. It was partly a vacation, but the Game of Thrones showrunners were also visiting Star Wars creator George Lucas there, doing research for the trilogy of films they were set to oversee after wrapping the fantasy drama Game of Thrones. Now, a few months later, the plans are as much in ruins as King's Landing, as late Monday night came the announcement that Benioff and Weiss were no longer attached to the trilogy they were hired to shepherd back in February 2018. The news predictably sparked a frenzy among Star Wars fans on social media. And oh yeah, no, it did. Oh, it very much did. So there's, again, they have their original statement, and their original statement says that we just couldn't make it work time-wise, that we had to, we got the deal with Netflix and then we had to go work on that. We can't really find the time to juggle them both. And it makes sense. Even though they were hired a year and a half ago, when it comes to Star Wars, Netflix is going to offer up more money and probably put a little bit more money on the table, at least maybe through an extension of the deal, or at least the promise of an extension of the deal down the road. And that's just my speculation. But at the same time, things aren't necessarily running well at Lucasfilm, and we know that. You can just look at the current state of affairs when it comes to the theatrical side of things and see that there's a lot of problems that are happening, and perhaps these guys just figured to not dive into the mess. Right. And I think that does play a part of it. I do think that even though this article does kind of frame it in that way, I do feel like there was a bit of stuff there. So going on to say here, it says, while there is some truth to their stated reason for parting ways with Lucasfilm, insiders say there's more to the story, more nuance to the story. So sources tell the Hollywood Reporter that Benioff and Weiss's exit has been brewing since August. Lucasfilm chief Kathleen Kennedy is said to have been unhappy with the Netflix deal, inked just as they were scheduled to begin work on Star Wars. Benioff and Weiss had said multiple times that they would not turn their focus to Star Wars until production wrapped on the final seasons of Thrones, which ended in July 2018. Kennedy was not convinced the pair, known for focusing on one project at a time, could develop a sci-fi trilogy while also overseeing film and TV projects at Netflix. Sources say that as the duo shopped for an overall deal over the summer, they told potential suitors that they plan to work on Star Wars concurrently with any projects under their new deal. And that much I actually do believe, to be honest with you. I think that they were probably thinking they could navigate both. And that is like bullheaded and egotistical, in my opinion. that's not something you want to do, right? Like if for some reason they came to me and they said, Matt, we love your passion for Star Wars, and you know, we've seen your terrible, horrible movie, but we really want you to work on a Star Wars project. I would do, I would like move to Marin County. You know, I would move my family there. They may not like it. We may live in a hut by the river, but it'd be fine. I'd be working on Star Wars. I would dedicate everything to that. All my time that outside of family would be done right to that. So I can understand like why she'd be upset. Now, it does go on to say here that sources say that Netflix learned of Benioff and Weiss's departure mere days before the news broke. Benioff and Weiss's departure also marks the latest in what's become a tenuous relationship between Netflix and Disney. Sources say that Disney was among the early meetings the Thrones pair had for an overall deal, though the Mouse House did not make it to the final round. Amazon was a frontrunner before Netflix swooped in. Disney famously severed ties with the streamer years ago when it began pulling back its Marvel movies as it prepared its own Disney Plus streaming service. Disney networks more recently began rejecting Netflix or advertising from Netflix. Although, to be fair, Bob Iger has said that that was a Netflix call, not a Disney call. So that is something. But it does say that all the representatives declined to comment. But going on, it continues. While Benioff and Weiss were in high demand after wrapping the mega hit Thrones controversial final season notwithstanding, the nine-figure deals such as theirs have traditionally been reserved for prolific producers who can manage multiple projects at once. Netflix, for example, paid Ryan Murphy $300 million over 5 years, and he's working on 10 projects less than 2 years after signing the deal. Benioff and Weiss, for their part, have never tackled anything other than Game of Thrones and have effectively only made 73 episodes of television over the past decade. It's also worth noting that there was nearly a 2-year delay before the abbreviated final season aired, the longest stretch the show was ever off the air. And again, that is true. But, and again, while I feel like this article is kind of aimed at the negative of Dan and Dave, what I think they're like not taking into account here is the fact that they shot like a 55-day night shoot when they did the long night, or when they did the Battle of Winterfell episode. Like that was a 55-day shoot. So it wasn't like it was just, and they shot it in the winter. So, you know, there was delayed due to climate and things like that. So I do feel like that's being a little bit disingenuous in regards to how it's reporting. And I've noticed a couple things in this article that come across as very much one-sided and not telling you the whole story, therefore trying to paint a narrative, which is clearly whoever wrote this article is doing this on behalf of Lucasfilm. You can tell that this is a PR hit. This is a PR punchback. Anyway, many TV industry insiders at the time questioned why Netflix would spend $250 million to be in second position to Star Wars. But sources familiar with the deal say Netflix and Disney were in a shared first position, meaning the duo could work on both simultaneously. Before signing the deal, Netflix was briefed on the Star Wars plans and wasn't worried about having to wait for them to finish a potential trilogy, earmarked for 2022, 2024, and 2026, saying it's not going to be 10 years until Netflix sees their first output, one source said, adding that Benioff and Weiss have a lot of ambition. And they do have a lot of ambition. You cannot do Game of Thrones without there being a lot of ambition, you know, and they've admitted at that Austin Film Festival panel that they were perhaps over ambitious in the beginning and they didn't know what they were doing. They bit off more than they can chew and they learned on the job. Now, granted, it does seem like they did rush the final season of Game of Thrones in order to get to Star Wars. But at the same time, it's kind of a disingenuous argument only because they were signed. They were signed to Star Wars in February of 2018 while they were already in production of the final season. So that was not like it was like a sudden decision to cut it so short. They had already planned those episodes out. They'd already written those episodes out, and the ending was already being worked on. So people who are talking about that, saying that they rushed it to finish it, I don't think they fully understand how television production works or just how production on this particular regard works. If you look at the technical aspects of season 8, whether you like it or not, just the visual effects alone, the practical effects alone, there is a lot of work that went into that. There is a 45-minute behind-the-scenes documentary about the episode The Bells that goes through everything, and it is massive what they did on that episode. You don't think about it because it looks good on the screen, but there's a lot that goes into it, and that all takes time, which is one of the reasons why they were off the air from summer 2017 to spring 2019, because that stuff took a lot of time. You know, it's like 2 years in between movies, right? This is kind of the same thing, but they just had it over 6 episodes. I mean, again, story notwithstanding, the technical elements of it were there. So, you got to cut him a little bit of slack. I think you do. You got to cut him a little bit of slack. Anyway, going on to say here, at the time of the Netflix pact, Benioff and Weiss were working on a treatment for Disney and Lucasfilm. The pair was committed to penning at least one of the films though the original deal was to write all three. Saying here that they are deep dive guys, one person said in their orbit, adding to the wrinkle that was, according to one source, the Netflix deal required them to be exclusively on sets of the projects they created during production and not to be away for Star Wars at the same time, meaning they couldn't be on set if they were just writing this and overseeing it. They would just kind of write it, and then they would have producers, and then the producers would run with it, and that would really be about it. Now, Kennedy, according to a source familiar with her thinking, was nervous. The duo could become the fourth directors to exit a Star Wars project since she took helm of Lucasfilm. Josh Trank was fired from a Star Wars standalone movie in 2015. Okay, but let's be fair on that one, though. That one gets brought up, but it's like never discussed what Trank's actions were, or at least what the perceived actions were. He did Fantastic Four. Fantastic Four was written by and executive produced by Simon Kinberg. Kinberg at the time was also executive producing and I believe working on the scripts for Star Wars Rebels. So he had an in at Star Wars, which is one of the reasons why I think Kinberg is going to make the jump soon to Lucasfilm. I have a feeling that's going to happen. I have a feeling he's going to get brought in here sometime in the future, if I'm being honest with you. But anyway, Kinberg was that connection, and Kinberg vouched for Trank. But then Trank had all those behind-the-scene problems with Fantastic Four. Going as far as to say that when the movie released in summer of 2015, that he tweeted out, "This was not my movie. This was not the movie that I set out to make." And the movie was an absolute disaster. So they did fire him off of that movie, but there was also reasons as to why they fired him. The behind-the-scenes story is that he was just a complete mess across the board. We don't have a lot of corroborating evidence to support that, but that is generally what is known as right now. So I do think that, again, by just saying Josh Trank was fired and not going into the reasons as to why, it's not the same thing as Phil Lord and Chris Miller, and it's not the same thing as Gareth Edwards in regards to Rogue One or Colin Trevorrow leaving Episode 9. There's so much more than that, but they for some reason they're just not talking about it. Anyway, going back to this, it kind of covers everything I just said. But then it goes on to say that Tony Gilroy was brought in to reshoot and rewrite much of what Gareth Edwards' 2016 standalone Rogue One did, and Ron Howard did step in to fix Solo. Now, when THR reported last month that Marvel Studios' Kevin Feige, the architect of Disney's multi-billion-dollar Marvel Cinematic Universe, would be working with Kennedy on a Star Wars movie, some speculated that this was an acknowledgement that not all is well in the Star Wars universe. For their part, Disney co-chairman Alan Horn and Alan Bergman continue to stand by Kennedy, saying with the close of the Skywalker saga, Kathy is pursuing a new era in Star Wars storytelling, and knowing what a diehard fan Kevin is, it made sense for these two extraordinary producers to work on a Star Wars film together. Look, everyone can read between the lines. They can read between the lines. It's not a problem here. Things are not good. Lucasfilm is in utter chaos right now. This is bad for Kennedy. Trust in the industry is not on her side. It hasn't been for quite some time. And the constant turnaround of high-profile directors, like I said in the reporting yesterday, is talking about the fact that at talent agencies, these directors don't want to go in for pitch meetings for Star Wars. They don't want to do it. People don't trust her because they don't want to invest their time and their energy and their effort, and only to walk away because they just have problems with the boss. And it all kind of keeps pointing back to Kennedy, even though this article is framed as an attack on Benioff and Weiss, because it is. It's definitely one of those things where you have to also, again, read between the lines and look to see what the grander, feeling is at the studio. So Benioff and Weiss were also feeling the heat and began having second thoughts about jumping on Star Wars due to what one source described as toxic fandom. The creators had built Thrones from the ground up based on author George R.R. Martin's sprawling novels, and were initially lauded by both critics and fans, who made the show HBO's most-watched original series ever. But the divisive 6-episode final season that aired in the spring was met with such backlash that the duo backed out of a farewell panel at the San Diego Comic-Con, which they did, and that was I should have just gone and faced it, to be fair. They might have been booed, they might have been whatever, but it's like, you are there and going like, look, we made what we wanted to make, and this is what it is. But it's like they said at the Austin Film Festival, they ran out of material. And what we know about that, what we can glean from that, is that Dan and Dave are good at adapting material that is already pre-created. Going forward with Star Wars, they would have supposedly looked at the origins of the Jedi, which would have been something that's interesting, probably pulling from a lot of EU material, which they could have then adapted into something. And I think that would have potentially worked out quite well. However, when it comes to Game of Thrones, and I have to reiterate this point once again, George R.R. Martin has not published a book in 8 years. He kept talking about the final 2 books. He kept talking about writing them. He still has not finished The Winds of Winter, the second to last book. He still hasn't done it yet. He says next year that if he doesn't have it done by 2020, fans can come and arrest him. Ha 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 ha. But he set Dan and Dave up to fail, because it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if they ran out of material. Like, people need to be aware here that George R.R. Martin failed the show. He failed the show. He had obligations and he failed the show, and he left it to the creators to come on in and to adapt what they had set up. Now, we got to understand too, and again, this is me being a Game of Thrones apologist, and I'll get called out in the comments, and that's totally fine. When you look at the context of the books, and I mean like everything in the books, and there's a lot of stuff there, all the characters, all the storylines, all the plot points, all the threads, all of this, all that, right? All those arcs. They chose what they felt were the best characters to tell a linear story on television, an adaptation. There are so many things that happen in books and comics and games that cannot be recreated for the big screen or the small screen. That's why they're adaptations. And I think a lot of people out there forget that fact, that when you read a book and you want to express someone's internal monologue or internal dialogue or what they're feeling or what they're saying, you have to then find a way to explain that on screen. And sometimes it doesn't end up the way that fans have built up in their own minds. The final season of Game of Thrones had its problems, and that was a lot to do with George R.R. Martin only really giving them bullet points of what to do, what he was going to do. And even now, based upon the backlash, he's going to sit there and retcon what he told them in order to make it out that he's doing it better. He failed them. I think they did the best that they could do. I think they just wanted to wrap it up in 7 seasons. You can make that argument that George had said, oh, but there's 10 seasons worth of content. Of course he's going to say that, because he gets paid for not doing anything. He gets paid for extending the show out. He gets his license fees or his executive producer fees. He gets paid. So of course he wants it to go on longer. But he still didn't uphold his end of the bargain. He didn't finish the story, and he still hasn't finished the story. So people need to get way the hell off Dan and Dave's back over that one, because quite frankly, they got the short end of the stick, and they got beat with that stick hardcore by fans and by critics. And they're still feeling the hit over that, even though I would argue that a lot of the problems with Lucasfilm come from the fact that Kathleen Kennedy mismanages it. Because really, what is it? Is it that they suck or that she sucks? It can't be both. And really can't be both. But people want to argue that it's Kennedy did nothing wrong. No way, man. No way. You got to pay attention to what the hell's going on, and you can see exactly what happened, as I've already explained multiple times. But then again, a lot of you out there, and I'm just going to say it might make me a jerk, but that's totally fine. A lot of you out there simply believe what you want to believe, despite the evidence staring you square in the face. Oh my God. Anyway, go on from this. Okay. So to go from Game of Thrones to Star Wars, where fans have bullied actors off social media and taken aim at filmmakers like Johnson, who want to go through that again. Now, who wants to go through that again? Not them, notes the source with knowledge of the Benioff and Weiss's thinking. This was a life's too short category. Whether forces internal or external were in play, Benioff and Weiss wanted out. It was a hard quit. Look, when you're up against the backlash to Game of Thrones, as I've just talked about as to why, when you're up against that, whether it's warranted or not, your opinion and mine will definitely vary on that one. But whether it's warranted or not, do they want to go through that again? No, I mean, that life's too short mentality, man. Like, that totally makes sense. Like, I get that. I totally get that. I get that as to why. It makes absolute sense as to why they would not want to go through that again. Anyway, let's continue here, because this article is kind of long. So It was a different scene when Kennedy brought Benioff and Weiss into the Star Wars galaxy. 3 months before the underwhelming performance of Solo in May 2018 led Disney and Lucasfilm to reevaluate its strategy and abandon its standalone film ambitions, meaning a number of projects in the pipeline had to be revamped or killed. Abrams' Rise of Skywalker, with this December release, closes a 40-year saga. Notice how they say in early 2018 when she brought them on that this was the start of the Last Jedi backlash, but no mention of that. Mention of the Game of Thrones criticism, but no mention of the Last Jedi backlash. Are we starting to notice a theme here? Are we noticing a pattern here? Are we noticing a shield around Kathleen Kennedy and Rian Johnson? Are we noticing a lot of that apologism happening? Because it's there. It's 100% there. Anyway. Earlier this year, Kennedy met with Benioff, Weiss, and The Last Jedi director Rian Johnson, whose own trilogy will explore new realms in the Star Wars universe to plot the next decade of films. With half those plans now blown up like the Death Star, sources say that Lucasfilm head is actively looking to enlist new filmmakers. Why would they go? Why would they go? When The Last Jedi was attacked because it was a bad movie, when Benioff and Weiss just bailed, when a lot of other high-profile filmmakers have bailed, there's no trust in Kathleen Kennedy as a studio head. The rumor is that she's just there in name only. Bob Iger calls all the final shots, and everyone's going to defend her because they don't want it to look like corporate politics has stifled Kennedy in any particular way, even though I believe anyone can take a solid look at what's going on and to see that they're absolutely out of control. Anyway, I think it goes on. Although Disney and fans might hope for Feige's touch to come to Star Wars sooner rather than later, it's unlikely Marvel executives' feature will be moved into that December 2022 slot that was once carved out for Benioff and Weiss. Feige, who was recently promoted to expand his oversight to include television, as well as film and other creative parts of the comic book powerhouse, will launch a massive slate of MCU TV spinoffs for Disney+, which launches on November 12th. I still think it's going to happen. I think at this point, the fans are just going to call for it. Right? The fans are going to call for it. If they don't have a backup plan in place by February of 2020, straight up, it's going to be the Feige movie. They're going to fast track the Feige movie because that's what fans want to see. If you want to restore faith in the brand, especially if there's a backlash to the Rise of Skywalker that I see happening in a couple places, but I don't know if it's going to be as massive as The Last Jedi. I think the Rise of Skywalker is going to be as crowd-pleasing of a movie as humanly possible. So it's going to be very difficult to have that same kind of just like a vicious response, right? Or I don't want to say vicious. I think that's wrong. A passionate response, because here it's been 2 years and people are still criticizing The Last Jedi. But anyway, it does go on to say here that one underlying problem that Benioff and Weiss exit illustrates, one source notes, is that there's still no consensus as to what Star Wars is and what Star Wars should be. Disney CEO Bob Iger said there would be a slowdown of Star Wars on the big screen, and Lucasfilm shelved the planned Obi-Wan Kenobi movie in favor of making it a Disney Plus streaming series, while the planned Boba Fett movie by filmmaker James Mangold was also put on ice. For now, the immediate future of Star Wars will be on the small screen with The Mandalorian and the Rogue One show coming up in the works. So, and then I like this here. Unlike Marvel, which had a clear vision of its cinematic universe, Star Wars has had trouble finding its footing. Johnson took big swings with the mythos in Last Jedi, and while the film was welcomed by critics and some fans, he was batted down by a vocal portion of the Star Wars community. Finally, here it says here, this stuff needs to be sorted out before it gets to a cataclysmic point. So that just shows you right there that it is chaotic. It's crazy in Lucasfilm right now, that it's absolutely wild. It's nuts. It's insane. But it's not Benioff and Weiss's fault. This article was designed to shield Kathleen Kennedy and blame the toxic fandom for Benioff and Weiss's exit. And the thing is, I think coming off of Game of Thrones and walking into that, if it's a life is too short mentality, man, I get it. I get it. Some stuff just ain't worth it. Just ain't worth it at all. But where we find ourselves now is in a position where we have to look to the future. And whoever or whatever comes next, I think we all can agree that as far as leadership is concerned within that particular realm, there's no one there steering the ship in the right direction. It feels rudderless. It just feels like it's drifting. And it's possible that that's the entire perception, simply because they want to get through The Mandalorian, which I think is going to like reestablish some of the fan base, get into the Jedi Fallen Order, which I think is going to bring in another part of the fan base, and then hopefully crowd please with The Rise of Skywalker, which is definitely going to bring in a lot of the fan base back into the fold. I really do. Because I think it's going to be something that's going to be a palate cleanser from The Last Jedi. And there's that. I mean, You know, there's no bigger failure in Star Wars than The Last Jedi. And that's just true. That's true. That's not even an opinion. It's a verifiable fact at this point. And that was because of Rian Johnson and Kathleen Kennedy and a lack of a vision. And that lack of a vision has now run through a multitude of filmmakers, and it's eroded trust in not only the brand, but the leadership, which means Bob Iger, who's got 2 years left on his own contract at Disney, has really got to make sure that he gets it in order, because that's going to be his legacy. And that's not a good one to have to be a failure. I mean, look at Galaxy's Edge. Anyway, your thoughts, your opinions on this, let me know down in the comments below. I know this was a long video, and I appreciate you guys getting to the end. If you made it to the end, go ahead and type Star Wars in the chat so I know that who's the real rock star. You guys are the real rock star. Please also be sure to like the video and subscribe if you're new and you want to get more commentary like this. Have yourself a great day. Happy Halloween, everyone. Hope you're rocking your costume, because, you know, hope you're doing it more than me. And have yourself a great one, everyone, and peace out.